Well, thank you all for being here and for taking an interest in this workshop. Um, I think Hekali, I think you need to let me enable me to share the screen so I can pull up some stuff. Okay. Hekali, were you able to do that? Or you start figuring it out? Okay. Get a little tech support there. Well, in the meantime, I think I could just, she did a great introduction for me. Thank you. I appreciate that. As she said, my name is Cozkacuauhtli, and I've been studying pre-Hispanic, sciences and traditions for nearly 30 years, and I've had the privilege of working with different maestros, like Acamapichli, Maestro Arturo Mesa Gutierrez from Mexico City, Malinalco. I've went numerous times to Mexico City to practice with Calpullis or danza groups over there. I learned Nahuatl at the University Nahuatl in Morelos, and also at CSUN under Fermin Herrera. And so it's been a beautiful path, that I've had the privilege of traveling, and along the years and those travels, I've acquired a lot of knowledge, and then I've also had the interest to investigate things and and delve a little deeper into some things. So I put together this presentation with the idea of like letting us think of pre-Hispanic dance with a little from a historical perspective, like see what has these native dances, what have they persevered, and how have they changed or devolved, if we could say it that way. So I think I got access to share now. So let me so the name Macehualiztli, that's one of the names for what people typically call danza or dance. So I'll use the term Macehualiztli. It's a Nahuatl term. It kind of means like it's kind of what the common people do. Is what's done by the people, right? Dancing. And let's see, so the ancient peoples of Anahuac, which is Mexico and Central America, they accomplished a lot of things, right? They built cities that were astronomically aligned. They developed like some of the most precise calendars in the world, especially at that time. They invented their own writing system, which not many countries did. Out of all the countries in the world, think about how many countries there are in the world, and the development of writing, it can be attributed to maybe three, perhaps four. And one of those are like is Mexico and Central America, so they had their own writing system that was invented. Not even the Europeans invented their own writing system. Our ancestors also invented their own number system, right? The number system we use today is Hindu Arabic, and it's borrowed, right? So our ancestors developed their own number system. And also some of our ancestors were masters of agriculture, right? They had a lot of agriculture implements that they invented and created. That way they were able to sustain large populations. So these things here, I just wanted to mention to show like the sophistication of our ancestors, the level of civilization, as opposed to that academic narrative that has us thinking that native peoples are like simple-minded or naive or superstitious. I think here I wanted to highlight that our ancestors were very scientific in their thinking and their reasoning. I'm not going to get into these cities here, but I want to point out that cities were aligned based on the movements of the cosmos, right? So an ancient observer would observe where the sun would rise on key solar positions, like equinoxes and solstices, and buildings were aligned according to that, right? And as we can see in this bottom image here, uh, this building here to the right is aligned to the sun when it rises during the winter solstice. And here in the center, it's the fall and the spring, the equinox. And then over to the left, we have the summer solstice. So these buildings here, they weren't for gods, they weren't for sacrifice, they were there to mark the solar positions and the movements of the cosmos. And this requires a lot of observation, keen observation, documentation, uh, and a high level of sophistication and understanding of astronomy and the natural cycles. So cities were aligned, as we can see here. Um, Calendar counts were invented by our ancestors. And the geographical region I'm talking about is from Mexico all the way to Central America. So, from Zacatecas to like the Mayan areas. Um, Calendars and registers were created, to document their cosmovision, their understanding of the natural cycles and the astronomical cycles. Books were written. And this is another thing that I think I want to mention is that, Europeans, they didn't even know about paper until Marco Polo brought paper from China, like in the late 1200s, and our ancestors had their own books by that time. Uh, you know, Before European arrival, our ancestors already were creating books and documents. Now they call them codexes or manuscripts. Um, and some of these books were, genealogical. Some of them were astronomical observances or documentation. Some of them were calendar counts. Our ancestors invented their own writing system, right? And it wasn't just pictographs where you see a picture and it means something, but they also had phonetic glyphs, right? They also had phonetic glyphs. This is an example of the phonetic glyphs that were developed in the Mayan area and the type of writing that they put in their buildings, right? This is not just decoration, it's a history and information. At the time of European invasion, the Europeans, they put together books that they were sending back to Europe. This is called the Códice Matritenses. And even here you could see some number systems that they were being used to count, certain materials, certain goods. And the part of the number system that they invented, like the bar and dot, a lot of people credit the Mayans for that, but we could see it in Olmec sculptures. Like this is an Olmec stone, which dates back about 2,000 years before Christ, and they were already using the bars and the dots for their number system. And this is some of the archaeological advancements that they had. They created, impressive techniques for gardening and for sustenance. This one in particular displays how in Mexico Tenochtitlan, Central Mexico, gardens were built, man-made islands were created in the middle of a lake, right? And the whole city was erected in the middle of a lake, very impressive. So they had little canals as opposed to streets where, you could travel and that would sustain the populace as well. So I mention all this because this science and the arts of our ancestors, this astronomical and calendar mathematical knowledge is expressed and documented in various art forms, right? In various art forms, like in sculptures, for example, in music and dance. The knowledge of the flora and fauna was also reflected in various art forms. And then we have the natural elements like seasonal changes and other phenomenon were also conveyed in the arts. So when we talk about Macehualiztli or pre-Hispanic dance, we're essentially talking about this ancestral knowledge that came by means of observation of thousands of years, thousands of years of observation and documenting. So the dances, if we could see it like like a physical expression of these natural cycles, right? The beats that are in the ancient dances, they have to do with the math that comes from these time counts, or from various calculations as well. The themes that are in the dances, they have to do with nature, right? Or with agriculture, for example. There's dances for the deer, there's dances for the corn, there's dances for the rain, for Tlaloc, there's dances for the tender corn. There's an array of dances, right? And they're not for gods. People think that the indigenous peoples of this continent had many gods, but what it is our ancestors were earth scientists, right? And they understood the way things function on Earth, right? They understood the natural cycles of life and of the cosmos, and the cycles of the stars and the constellations. Uh, so they had names for those things, and they weren't gods, because when I think of a God, like a Judeo-Christian God, it requires like that element of faith, right? To believe in it. But when we're talking about like pre-Hispanic, cosmovision, uh, it's all tangible. If I'm talking to you about Tlaloc, it's not the god of rain, it's rain, right? And you've experienced rain, right? So I want to just make that distinction. So all this knowledge, it's working its way into the art forms. And one of those art forms is Macehualiztli, is dancing. So Macehualiztli was an intricate function of the pre-Hispanic society, right? It was a part of like the educational system of ancient times. It was part of their entertainment, part of healing, part of their traditions and sciences. It had a function in civic events, right? And so there were different schools, right? So the Mashtiloyan is a school, for where people would go, like, the youth and the kids. Telpochcali is a school for young men. Ixpochcali is a school for young women. Calmecac was like a higher learning, facility. And the Tlilan Calmecac is like a university. And Cuicacali is like the performing arts center, like schools for performing arts. Um, and for entertainment, there was a building for example, in the Mexica ancient city of Tenochtitlan, there was a building called the Mixcoacali, right? In the Mixcoacali, poets would show up there. They have personal events. They recite poetry. They would dance. Just like a center where people would come and for entertainment and to express their talents. um, Dance and song was also used for healing, the rhythms, the beats. And we know that people do sweat lodges or temazcales, and the singing and the drums are essential for that, right? So there's also dances for medicinal dances as well, and exercises. um, and the dances also, the Macehualiztli, it also, some of them convey legends, right? It was like part of that oral tradition, but in this case, we could call it corporal tradition. It was a way to communicate knowledge of nature, right? A way to communicate stories of creation, for example, right? But it would be done through dances. People study yoga, and people that study yoga, they understand that each move in yoga, it represents something, right? It has a name, it has a concept that's connected to it. So in the ancient dances of Mexico and Central America, they also have meaning, right? Each movement has a meaning, represents something. It's not just people dancing and hopping around, but really they're expressing different movements that are helping them harmonize with their environment, that are showing gratitude to natural elements and a natural phenomenon. And also, what made dancing very intricate in society was that every month, right? There was 18 months of the year in the pre-Hispanic calendar, right? There were 18 months of 20 days, and every month had a particular theme. Some of those themes were astronomical, right? Like observations, where they'd have vigils. Some of them were had to do with agriculture, and some of them had to do with civic jobs. Like they'd have ceremonies for the youth, where the telpochcali would come out and lead the ceremonies. They have ceremonies where the healers would come out and lead them. They had ceremonies where the warriors were like the main theme of that particular month. They had ceremonies for the hunters. So it's like different aspects of society was represented in these different celebrations. So everyone danced, you know, from the little ones to the older ones. The government officials danced in ancient times. The Europeans, when they invaded, they documented what they observed. And even they document that even the Tlatoani, you know, which is like was a high, the you know, like the main leader of the society, you know, was an advanced dancer, you know, an exemplary dancer. So it was like an integral part of society. These are those 18 months. And on the right, we see a natural constant that they're all linked to. So they were like, Tlaloc is the rain, Xipetotec is the rebirth of the earth, you know, when it resurges, you know, year after year. Tlaloc again, the rain was a highly, you know, respected element. We have the corn, and we have the Tezcatlipoca, which is like time and space. You know, we have Huitzilopochtli, which is like the rising sun of the winter. So we have all these different names here that historians and Western academia confuses as gods, but they're all natural and astronomical phenomenon. And for each of these celebrations, dance was an intricate part of it. You know, it couldn't exist without danza. Danza or Macehualiztli was part of every single one of these ceremonies. There were ceremonies that important ceremonies that marked the solstices, the equinoxes, you know, which are documented in what they call the Aztec calendar or the Mexica Tonalmashot. And then we have some sources in pre-Hispanic sources, right? So this is a symbol of the moon, right? This is a personification of the moon, and it's known as Coyoshauqui. Now, the name Coyoshauqui in Nahuatl, it could be interpreted as she who's adorned in rattles, right? Shauqui is to be adorned, and Coyol is the little rattles, right? The little rattle bells. So the rattles are the moon was seen as like the dancer of the night, the sky dancer, right? You see the moon compared to like the sun, for example. The sun doesn't change shape, right? The sun is always like a circular or a sphere, you know, where you see from looking at it from Earth, the moon appears to change shape, right? Sometimes she's a sliver of light, sometimes she's a quarter moon, you know, full moon. So our ancestors, they poetically called her Coyoshauqui, like the sky dancer, the one who shows different positions, right? The one who's constantly dancing throughout the sky. These are found in Monte Alban in Oaxaca. These stones. Now, a lot of historians and researchers, they call these, like, they say that they're images of slaves, but one of them is actually holding a rattle, right? So there's another thought of line here that these are likely dancers, you know, dancers of Monte Alban. This mural here is in the Mayan region called Bonampak, right? And Bonampak in the Mayan region is a pre-Hispanic mural, you know, created before European invasion. And you can see dancers in the front that are carrying these large gourd rattles, right? This gentleman here behind the guy with the last gourd rattle, he's playing a drum that's up to his chest. Like this white part is like the skin, the pelt of the animal. And he's playing a drum with his hands, known as a panwewek, right? And then the guy next to him has a turtle shell that he's playing, you know, also. So these are like, you know, and these were likely high functionaries. You know, these are probably like persons that high-ranking persons in the Mayan society, and they too were dancing, and they too were having processions of dance and music. This is in the Codex Nutal or Noto, plate 79. This codex is about different characters, right? One of them, his name is 8 Masak, 8 deer, which is this gentleman here. You can see his name symbol here, his calendar name. And through the codex, they show him when he gets the rattles for the first time, and he gets a nose piercing, like saying he's getting leadership, you know, responsibilities. And they come to this platform, and they're performing some ancestral dances. In the Codex Borgia, plate 60, you can see a gentleman here playing a wewet, an ancient drum, vertical drum, and he's playing it with his hands, as you can see. And the female here, she has a hand rattle, and she has a deer antler, and she's playing that little turtle conch, that little turtle shell down there at the bottom. Here at the top of this plate, it's called the Codex Becker. It's probably a Mixtec codex. You see a person here at the top left, they're playing an instrument called the teponaztli. And next to them is a person playing the huehuet, the large vertical drum. And then to their right is a gentleman sitting here and he's blowing into this gourd, you know, kind of like how they do with the conch, like a conch shell, you know, but they could use the gourd like a trumpet type sound to get out of there. So again, dancing and instrument playing was well documented in ancient pre-Hispanic sources. Here in the bottom right corner, we see a gentleman with the drum between his legs here, like a huehuet. You know, he's playing it with one hand there, and he has a rattle on the other. And the female has a hand rattle in her hand there, and she also is holding a deer antler in her hand, playing this turtle shell here as well. Again, you know, showing the music of in pre-Hispanic times. This is in the Codex Borgia, plate 39, and this one shows a group of women. Their rank, according by their insignias, their dress, and their facial paint, and their nose septum rings. They're they're Tlazoteotl, right? It's like a type of they're a type of healers, right? It's like a feminine aspect of healers. And in the center circle, you see a gentleman playing like a clay drum, or it could be a gourd with a jaguar pelt on it. And another gentleman, he has like this flowery speech coming out of his mouth, like, you know, signifying song and poetry and things of the sort, right? And the women are here choreographing beautifully. Half of the circle is heading towards the right. The other half of the circle is heading towards the left. And they're kind of like, they're coming into this one path to where they're exiting the circle, you know? So even the choreography was documented in this book here, in this plate. Now, this was all interrupted with the invasion of the Europeans, of the Spaniards, right? And in 1511, there was a shipwreck near the coast of Yucatan, and two gentlemen survived that shipwreck, right? So one of them was Jerónimo Aguilar, and the other one was Gonzalo Guerrero, and they both survived, right? And Jerónimo Aguilar is important because later on, when Cortés shows up a few years later, right? When Cortés shows up a few years later, this guy had learned Mayan by that time. He learned the Mayan language. So he helped like interpret, or so-called interpret, between the natives and what Cortés was saying, you know? And the guy Gonzalo Guerrero, the other guy that survived the shipwreck, he actually integrated into the Mayan society. He married a Mayan woman and he integrated into the Mayan society, and he fought against the Spaniards, you know? So he used his knowledge of Spanish warfare to assist the natives, you know? He knew that the Spaniards, his own people, were bad news. In 1517, Francisco Hernandez Cordova, he leaves the island of Cuba, which is where the Spaniards had a base. You know, after the invasions of Christopher Columbus, they set base there in Cuba, and the governor there was Velázquez, and he was launching these expeditions. So he launched his expedition in 1517 to Mexico. So this guy Cordova, he came to the Mayan region of Champoton, and he was attacked, right? So he was repelled by the Mayans. And they document that many men were injured of his tripulation, and they just went back to the island of Cuba. And a year later, Velázquez sent another expedition under the leadership of Juan Grijalva, and he actually disembarked. And I don't know if he didn't learn from history, but he disembarked in the same place, Champoton, where the previous invader was attacked. So Grijalva he disembarked, and he was attacked that evening and lost many men, and he himself was injured, but they had to return back to Cuba. So it wasn't until 1519, a year after that, that Hernan Cortés, he leaves Cuba. Actually, he leaves like a fugitive, right? Because Velázquez was working with him, planning an expedition to try to make it into Mexico. But Hernan Cortés left before, right? So he like left with the resources and the men and the firepower and the ships. He took off without Velázquez, the governor's permission. So he leaves as a fugitive Cuba. and he gets to Mexico, and this is what they do. As you can see in this mural by Diego Rivera, you could see they enslaved natives. Hernan Cortez is here, like with this orange beard and almost in the center with this horse. Um, you know, they would brand people. And it was just awful. They would hang them from trees, and it was just like just terrible situation. Where they just came to enslave and to steal and to pillage and to rape. The native peoples. So we can deduce from all this that ceremonies, all those beautiful ceremonies that were held in the courtyards of the ancient cities, those ceased, right? Nobody was coming out to dance no more for the calendar or to do astronomical observations in public, right? What we know as dancing or Macehualiztli, it comes to a halt at this point, right? But there's some friars, right? Some friars that documented things. This top one here is in Spanish, but I'll translate it. It says that the drums and the songs of the dancers. This is Fray Torvio Benavente. They call him Motolinea. I guess he was kind of bummy because Motolinea in Nahuatl means the poor one. So the natives called him the poor one. So this friar, he documents this. He says the drums and the songs of the dancers, they have a concerted compass, are so uniform, right? They're so conformed to each other. There's no discrepancy from one dancer to another, not even a drop. Even the best dancers of Spain, they get scared when they see this, right? They have so many dances, these naturals, right? And they guard them with such sentiment, and they just cherish these dances. So, he's documenting on the love that people danced with and how, and the level of skill, right? That one dancer they were in harmony with one another. And a friar by named Diego Duran, he's well known and highly cited by academics. And he says that he talks about he describes how the Cuicacali, which is the house of song, was inhabited by dance and song instructors. And Duran comments that the arts were taught in mixed groups of males and females. Now note, in ancient society, the young men had their own school, the Telpochcali, and the women had their own academic institution known as the Ixpochcali. So school was separated by gender, right? But the arts, it was co-ed. They brought both genders together to study the arts, to study song, to study dance, to study other art forms, theater, etc. So I thought that's very interesting. So even though the friars, they had an intent to destroy that civilization they were invading, and they were Christianizing people, right, with the intent to get rid of the natives' culture and the natives' belief systems, but they did some good in the sense where we could read what they documented and at the same time be fascinated by the advancements of the civilization that they were trying to destroy. Here, Fray Bernardino de Sahagún, who wrote many books, he describes how the month celebration known as Tecuhtli, how a woman was elected to represent Xilonen. Xilonen is like the tender corn. So a woman was represented to represent Xilonen. This woman is said to have carried like cañas of elote. That means like reeds of corn on various occasions. In his so-called compiled work, Sahagún provides examples of how well prepared community representatives led ceremonies and represented some form of natural phenomenon. So this is the part where I look at it like their ancient dances was almost like theatrical, right? You'd have a person representing like the tender corn, for example. You have a person that will come geared up with insignias of the rain, and they would represent the rain during that ceremony, right? So you have like, people coming out maybe dressed like the moon, all in a particular and a specific ceremonies, they would come out, and with such respect and veneration, towards these natural elements that govern us. So part of the invasion, cities were destroyed and burned and plundered, women were raped, men and women were killed, children, men and women were killed. And in Mexico, in central Mexico, the population was decimated from 25 million to less than 1 million. Think about that. Like, I know we study in schools about Holocaust, but they never teach us about the Native American Holocaust, right? I think it's terrible that there was a Jewish Holocaust and 6 million persons died, and Polish people died as well. And there was an Armenian Holocaust that's disgusting, right? Where we lost like 2 million people. And here in just central Mexico alone, we're seeing that 24 million people were like eradicated from the face of the earth, due to European invasion, right? So land and resources were taken, natives were enslaved. So this physical genocide, it goes hand in hand with cultural genocide, right? Which is here in the center, where native sciences and arts were prohibited, native languages were prohibited, the clothing that natives wore was prohibited, Christian ideologies and doctrine were imposed, right? And scientific thinking was substituted with faith. So these scientific peoples were no longer allowed to be scientific. They had to become religious, right? And speaking of Aztec dancing or native dancing, the instruments that the natives used were prohibited. And syncretism of Christian faith and Anahuac sciences became more evident. Natives who moved from their communities were considered mestizos. So the mestizaje is mostly cultural. People think, oh, we're mestizos. We have Spanish blood and we have some African in us and some native, and we're a mix. Well, at this time at this time of history, a lot of the mestizos were just persons that were leaving the city. So like if you left your native community and you're working in a city, you were like in an urban setting, working in the contemporary city of that time, you were seen as a mestizo as well. So it seems to be more like a cultural thing as opposed to a genetic, right? Even though that was all, they also had a caste system, right? That's not to say that they didn't have a caste system at that time. The Spaniards were sick puppies. This is in Spanish, but I'll move over to this. So this is an example of what our brothers here from the north, right? This is kind of like, you see this is the same gentleman, right? This is the same person, and you could see, although this is more of a brother from the northern tribes, northern nations, but you could see like even the color of his skin changed, through time, his hair. You can see here he's already wearing Christianized necklaces here, but over here to the right, he even has a suit. His apparel's changed. So this was, they didn't set up boarding schools in Mexico, but the church played that role, right? The Catholic Church in Mexico, after they killed a lot of the adults, and murdered the warriors, and they killed a lot of the wise people, the sages, they would take the orphan kids and they would raise them in the church, right? To be their scribes, to help them out with rituals and things like that. So from 1521, which is when the Spanish took over Mexico, when the ancient city fell to their hands, all the way to the 1800s, the original form of dancing or ceremonies, it was prohibited. You could not be out in the street, talking about Tlaloc, the rain, or trying to do a little ceremony for the cornfields that you just planted. It was just not permitted. In fact, you would get lashes, you would get whipped if you ate certain foods, like amaranth, for example. If you ate amaranth at this time, there was like 100 lashes that the person would get. So even foods were prohibited that they thought were linked to some of the native gods or these native concepts that they celebrated. So it was a real thwarted view of the Spaniards, right? Very fanatic outlook that they had, and they committed atrocities under that pretense. So the ancient drum, like the huehuet that we see here on the left, this is an actual one from Malinalco. It's in the museum. The ancient drums were prohibited. So the Spaniards introduced string instruments, right? But the natives, they put their little touch to it. Like the natives, they put the armadillo shell in back of it, because the armadillo is an animal that, he digs holes into the ground. So it was seen as a terrestrial animal. And this type of armadillo has 9 bands, like 9 stripes on it, right, on its shell. And the number 9 is seen as a terrestrial, as a feminine number. Just like the 13 that complements it is seen as like a cosmic, as a masculine, or like a day number. So the 9 bands that the armadillo has, the fact that the armadillo is like an earth little critter that digs, that digs into the orifices of the earth. So natives would use this animal's shell to create string instruments, right? So now the natives, they couldn't use that beat, the thunderous wet, boom, 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 boom. They couldn't use that to keep the beats or the rhythms. Now they had to do it by plucking strings or strumming, but these instruments were kind of used like percussion in a sense, even though they had chords. So the natives use these strings instruments to still preserve the rhythms, that our ancestors would play on the drum previous to that. And native clothes were prohibited for being like what they called indecent, right? Because they showed a lot of legs and a lot of body, a lot of skin, right? So when natives would be out in public, they had to wear pants or European clothes, right? Or when later on, when they were doing dances or ceremonies, they were encouraged to wear long sleeves, vests. Like even the men had to wear like these long skirts called nahuillas, they had to wear tights under that skirt too, like to hide their legs, to hide the flesh. A lot of them, they'd have like big collars to cover the neck area, because the Catholic Church was putting those demands on them, so they changed the pre-Hispanic attire and clothes, as we see in the left, to clothes that was more like covering, right? It didn't show, the flesh or the skin. So I don't know. I don't think our ancestors took this lightly. We have to put ourselves in their place at that time. I think it was humiliating, when they just strip you of your traditions and of your customs and of your clothes, and they force you to speak another language. They force you to, have another belief system, and they force you to dress differently, because of their own, the invaders' views. So, this wasn't something that we can romanticize. Oh, it was beautiful, and oh, the two cultures came together, and that's what being a mestizo is. It was violent, right? It was violent, and it was aggressive, and it's genocide, cultural genocide in this case, and we need to call it what it is. So the European style of clothes that was imposed too. This page here, it shows like the different caste system that they had, like a Spaniard that was born in Europe was a higher level than a Spaniard born in Mexico, for example, even though he had Spanish parents, but he was like a criollo, a lesser type of Spaniard. And then they have like mestizos or sambos that have like African in them, and it's just like this whole complicated caste system. So the clothes that you wore, it also had to do with who you were in society, right? Not everybody was allowed to wear the same thing, depending who you were in society. At the European arrival and during the colonial era, you were wearing what corresponded to your people at that time, to who you were. It was like a racial caste system, racial and socioeconomic caste system. So what happens during this time? So during the colonial and the time after the colonial period, the function of Macehualiztli, the function of dancing, right, it shifts from being astronomical and natural to being religious, right? So we go from like observing solar positions and equinoxes. Our ancestors that they did at one point, they would do dances to celebrate those solar positions. That no longer was happening, at least not in public, maybe in the privacy of certain homes, right? But if we look at the image to the right, they started building churches at the sites where natives had ancient cities or important structures, right? They started building churches up on top, right? Because they knew the natives wouldn't stop visiting these places. Natives would continue visiting these ancient sites and these ancient astronomical buildings. So the Spaniards, they started building churches. Of course, who built them? The native slave force. They built these churches on top of these ancient structures, right? This one here is in Cholula, in Puebla, Mexico, and they call it La Virgen de los Remedios, the Virgin of the Remedies. So it's interesting because from what I understand, I think Jesus, he performed like 7 miracles in his life. Like he put mud on a guy and he made him see, and he raised somebody, Lazarus, from the dead, and he turned water into wine, and I believe he walked on water. I mean, you know, there's like about 7, you know, miracles that is documented, and the Holy Land, right? Well, guess what? I think Mexico should be the Holy Land because so many miracles happened in Mexico after the European invasion. It's crazy. Even Jesus would be astonished, right, at this, you know, in the 1530s, this virgin appeared in this agave, right, in the maguey, and that's where the previous image we have here that up here. This is where this was like where Mayahuel or Mayawali was celebrated. The concept of a maguey or of the agave, and they say a virgin de los remedios. She appeared in the maguey. So guess what? No more ancient concept of Mayahuel or Mayawali. Now that virgin was being worshipped there. A year later, the patron, a Spanish patron known as Apostol Santiago, he appears in Querétaro on the 25th of July, which is the zenith of that part of Mexico, right? So guess what? Now they don't celebrate the zenith of Mexico during that time. Now people go there and they celebrate Apostol Santiago. And that same year, a few months later, the Virgin of Zapopan, this is in Jalisco, she appears on the 12th of October, which is the date that marks Columbus's invasion. So, you know, now people are worshiping her and dancing for her and having celebrations around her. And then a couple months after that, the Virgin of Guadalupe, she appears in Tepeyac, right? Precisely on the winter solstice of the Julian calendar. So guess what? Now the Mother Earth ceremony that was held there, that's no longer, you know, taking place. Now the worship for the Virgen de Guadalupe takes the place of that. And in 1533, another saint appears, right? Like a black Christ, Señor de Chalma. He appears in a cave in Chalma where they used to honor Tezcatlipoca and Tepeyolocli. Well, not anymore. Now they have a black Christ there that people go and worship. And La Virgen de San Juan de los Lagos appears. So, and this goes on and on and on and on and on. There are literally hundreds of stories of different apparitions and different miracles that happened throughout Mexico during these the 30s and the 40s of the 1500s. So between 1530 and 1540, you have like hundreds of miracles happening throughout Mexico. Now, come on, let's be real. Like this is all a hoax, right? It was all a way to deter the natives, right, from their ancient practices. What a coincidence that all these virgins and states are appearing in all these ancient cities, right, and all these ancient sites, right? What a coincidence that they're appearing where people would gather to do ceremonies for these ancient concepts and astronomical phenomena, right? So it becomes like a deviating tool, right? They're deviating the natives from like their original celebration, right? And they're stealing that geographical location by building a church there and putting these saints and virgins in place of the concepts that the natives were celebrating. But I want to bring attention to this 1531, this patron of Spain, right? This one right here. This one right here. This one is very important in the history of danza, right? Or what we call Macehualiztli, the Aztec dance. This one right here is highly important because we know that Spain, before Spain invaded Mexico, Spain was invaded by the Moors, right? Spain was invaded by the Moors, and the Moors, if you look at the green territory here, the Moors, they governed Spain, and through time, Spain started fighting back. It took them nearly 800 years for Spain to fight the Moors back and take over the peninsula, right? So by the time they this is like, by the way, this is in 1492, like their last battle in Granada that the Spaniards have against the Moors, right? Against the Muslims to liberate themselves. And guess what they do after that? They go try to enslave other people themselves, So they liberated themselves, and now they're like a warrior people. The Spaniards, they became a warrior society, a warrior outlook, fanatic, an intolerable people, right? You couldn't have a different belief. They exposed the Jewish, they exposed the Moors, they exposed everyone from the peninsula, which is today Portugal and Spain, right? They exposed everyone. So the Spaniards, this who came to Mexico, right? Not very nice people. So why am I telling you this? Because one of their main saints, like when they would battle the Moors, they would call upon Saint James, right? And Saint James, he would appear like, miraculously, and he would support the Christian army, right? This is what they believe, right? It might sound silly to you, but this was like their thought. Uh, and this Saint James would come out and he'd give them strength, and he'd ally with the Spaniards, right? And they would battle the Moors, and they would destroy the Moors. So one of his nicknames was the Matamoros, which means Moor Slayer, right? Saint James was called Matamoros, the Moor Slayer. And why am I talking about that? We're not even in Spain, right? Well, guess what? They brought those ideas, right, uh, to what we call Mexico today. And Don Quixote, which is like by Cervantes, he says this: Saint James, the Moor Slayer, one of the most valiant saints and knights the world ever had, has been given by God to Spain for its patron and protection. So this is who this saint represents to the Spaniards. Like they were like, this is our saint, so we can go out and kick butt in God's name. This is like our warrior saint, right? This is like their battle god, if you could call it that. This is who they called upon to go destroy the enemy. Well, guess what? Uh, they had depictions of this guy, and they would draw the saint on top of a horse and trampling, as you can see down there. He would be trampling on Moors, right? And here's another like more modern picture of it. Here's Saint James or Apostol Santiago, you know, just just destroying Moors, right? Just running over them and just stepping all over them with their horses and killing them. He was a Moor slayer. Well, why is that important to the Mexico dance, the study of Mexican danza? Well, because in 1531, in Querétaro, Mexico, St. James appears right there. What? Yeah, that's right. He came from Spain and he appeared over here in Mexico, according to these people, right? He comes over, and this is a legend of Sangre Mal, right? This is a legend. I mean, I'll read it to you and we'll talk about it. Legend holds that the Chichimecas were fighting against the Spaniards on a hillside for a few days. There were deaths on both sides, and all combatants were bloodied up. Apparently, there was an eclipse, and the Spaniards invoked Santiago Matamoros. So they're calling their saint to kick butt, right? He then appeared in the sky, mounted on his horse with an luminous sword held above his head. At the sight, the Spaniards yelled, "Él es Dios," which in English means he is God, right? "Él es Dios." The saint, he ordered peace, at which the natives felt shame. So they cried and thus surrendered. The natives, then suddenly they felt happiness, right? And they began to dance and sing, and they themselves started singing, "Él es Dios, Él es Dios, He is God, He is God." And since then, the hill is referred to as El Cerro de Sangre Mal. And every 25th of July, the people of Querétaro and people from different type of dancers from Mexico, especially of the genre conchero dancers, they migrate to Querétaro and they dance at this hill, Sangremal, where they have a large cross there now. And what do? They say that term. They say their phrase, "Él es Dios, He is God, Él es Dios." So I am like in awe about this because I mean, it just shows how colonized, the native people are at this point, right? If you're hollering out a phrase that the Spaniards hollered out to their patron to kill you, and you're taking it as your own phrase, and you're hollering it out during your celebrations and your ceremonies, I mean, it's pretty sad, right? It's pretty sad. So it just shows the how 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 impactful this genocide was, and how they switched narratives on the native peoples. The native peoples who at one point were scientific and critical thinkers and observers, and who documented the movements of the sky and the natural cycles of the earth. Now they've been reduced to persons that are crying because a saint appeared or something, and they're worshiping that saint that their invaders invoked. Like, I don't know, it's pretty sad. So in Querétaro, in their coat of arms, they have that little dude right there. He's right there. He's part of the coat of arms in Querétaro. So this is something that Querétaro is real proud of. You know, they're real proud of St. James and stuff, and a lot of the dancers, a lot of the dances that we know today in Mexico and in the Southwest U.S. and throughout, a lot of them came from Querétaro, right? Querétaro seemed like one of the birthplaces of what they call Danza Chichimeca or Danza Azteca, right? What later became the concheros, the people that were playing that little armadillo thing. You know, a lot of the dances they stem from this place, from Querétaro. But it's the ideology that is saddening. You know, the ideology that comes with it. So Concheros, they have this little slogan, you know, union, conformity, and conquest. And I'm not going to get into how they run a ceremony. I mean, this could be for like another topic, but for another occasion, I should say. Uh, but they have three main leaders during their ceremonies, three palabras. I'm guessing because of the Trinity, you know, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. So they did things by three. Um, and if you're a conchero, you have these obligations, right? Obligación. And in Mexico City, they go to these five different sites, right? Where Tepeyac, which is the Virgen de Guadalupe, said to appear, and they go to El Cristo de Sacramonte in Ameca Meca, where Tlaloc was acknowledged in the cave there before, and they go to Chalma, what I was talking to you about earlier about the Black Christ, and they go to the Lady of the Remedies, you know, in Naucalpan, right, where Mayahuel was honored there. So and so these places that had ancient concepts connected to them, now they have these religious concepts linked to them. So the concheros, you know, throughout the year, they'll do pilgrimages to these different sites, you know, like to Chalma, for example. And they'll go there and they'll dance and they'll go into the rivers of Chalma and they do the, you know, all these ceremonies and things like that. But it's all syncretized with Catholic and Native traditions, like mixed, right? You know, like natives mixed. Now, again, this is the colonial time. You know, this is after this is during the colonial era and after the colonial era. This is the byproduct of it. But Mexico was ravished by wars, you know. So in 1810 to 1821, it was that war for their independence, you know, when the Spaniards were finally kicked out of Mexico, at least, you know, theoretically maybe. You know, in 1821 was when that battle ended, and then they lost Texas to the Americans, so to the U.S. Right in 1836, and this was funny. The Pastry War. Oh, well, the French attacked Mexico because they said Mexico owed them some money, and they came to claim it. And then we have the Mexican American War, which is when Mexico took. I mean, when the U.S. took like a large part of Mexico's territory. You know, they took California, New Mexico, Colorado, part of Wyoming, Utah, you know, and all these other areas. Um, and then we have the Reform War, which is like when Benito Juarez and others were battling, and the French intervention. Again, Benito Juarez and them defeated Maximilian. And then we have the Mexican Revolution from 1910 to 1920. And then we have the Cristero War. The Cristero War was an interesting one. We had Mexico had a president named Calles, and he thought that the church was too powerful, right? And he was trying to separate state and church, which is like what Benito Juarez was talking about before. He was separating state and church, and he was taking those resources away from the church and making them communal lands, right? For the people and call ejidos and things like that. Well, guess what? The populace, they didn't like that. The church priest, they called on the people and the populace to fight against the government for taking power from the church. So here we have the Christian, the Catholic believers fighting against the government, you know, who's trying to take resources from the church, which was super powerful at that time. So the Cristero War, 90,000 people died during that war. You know, 30,000 rebels, you know, that were fighting for the church, which were primarily native and rural people, and they were fighting against the federal government, who lost about 60,000 people there. So it's crazy, right? So during all this time, it's highly unlikely that, you know, Macehualiztli was probably not done publicly during this time. It was people were dancing probably like in private events or for the church, right? The church would allow certain ceremonies to be done for the saints or the virgins, right? Dancing kind of had been devolved to dancing for the church or for saints or for patrons and things like that. But I'm sure it wasn't done publicly much during all these wars, you know, especially that last one during the Cristero Wars. Um, so from this, the conchero groups, they start organizing themselves as like in a military form, right? Like the people that were in charge of the Aztec dance groups or the conchero groups, they call them like generales, right? And you have capitanes, captains, and sergeants and soldiers and etc. Right? And the lady who carrying the smoke, they call her Malinche, like Malinalsin, you know, like in Mexico's history, they see her like a traitor, but really she was a victim. She's one of the translators for Cortez. So you know the structure of the concheros and of danza of dance became militarized, you know, and it doesn't surprise me because you know at this point of history, you know, our people have been through so many wars, right? Through so many wars, war after war after war after war. So when they started structuring their dance groups, they brought those terms and some of those outlooks and those concepts into their structure, into their lives, into their formations. Now, in 35 and in 1940, some changes came about. Like the church kind of gained some of its liberties back, right? So they were able to perhaps do ceremonies were probably done a little more publicly. You know, in the churches they established something called mesas, like it would be like tables, I guess, translate to that. And these mesas, they were kind of like the conchero dancers of that particular church. So each church had its own mesa and the dancers. So it became almost like a lineage thing. Like they were like the ones saying, "Hey, these are the mesas that are controlling a particular dance groups in this area, right? And any group that doesn't come from this mesa, from this religious setting, from this religious institution, was seen as illegitimate, right?" Now, remember that the dress was changed when the Spaniards came. Natives could no longer wear their loincloth or their mashlat or taparrabo because it showed too much legs and stuff, right? The men couldn't be shirtless, you know, to do ceremony. They had to wear like long sleeves and collars and all that. Well, you know, that started changing, right? Um, you know, so everything was syncretized and it had a military structure, but um, there was a cultural revolution during that time too, an ideological and cultural revolution, right? And Mexico, it started like questioning a lot of that history. It started taking pride in the indigenous contributions, right? We had Dr. Ott teaching at the universities about this. We had Diego Rivera, Clemente, and Orozco, and Siqueiros doing murals throughout the city to educate, you know, the masses through murals that were holding the indigenous experience and people in high regard, right? You know, it's kind of like this indigenous awakening. Jose Vasconcelos himself, he was in charge of education. He wasn't the greatest guy. He had some issues to him, but he was getting a lot of the walls for these muralists in these educational institutions and these government buildings so that they could, you know, they could show the murals and the history, you know, of the indigenous people of Mexico. You know, Milano Zapata was painted, Pancho Villa. You had, you know, the Aztec culture painted on the walls, the Mexicas, better said, Tlaxcaltecas. I mean, just all kinds of history was being painted on the walls of Mexico throughout Mexico. So this cultural ideological revolution, it started impacting danza too. So think about the dancers that were now Christianized, that were dancing like in this regalia that was foreign, right? Uh, you know, it began to change. So you had these teachers, right? In the 40s, there was a teacher, Manuel Pineda. We'll talk about Florencio Yescas later, but this was Florencio Yescas' teacher, right? So Manuel Pineda, he's one of the ones that decides to leave these skirts called nahuillas, right? These skirts right here that they're dancing with, they're called nahuillas, and these little wooden shoes. You know, he decides to change that. And they start making outfits kind of like the one on the right here, more like the native codexes, like the ancient books, right? More like the pre-Hispanic, you know, dress, you know, ooh, and they're showing their legs and their body, right? So that move that he did, and he was a conchero, right? He was a dancer for the church, right? He was a dancer from this lineage of these mesas, right? So that that idea of changing the outfit was very revolutionary at that time, and it was frowned upon by many of the elders in that type of dancing structure. You know, that was frowned upon, it wasn't accepted, but he went through with it, and others followed, right? Others followed, and you know, so they started bringing out the instruments, because they would just play with this little string instrument, the mandolina, you know, or the concha they call it, you know, and you know, Natividad Reina, he's from like Baja California, and 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 uh, and the Aranda family from Mexico City, you know, like Felipe Aranda and his family, they also followed the change, and they started using these pre-Hispanic instruments. They started making drums, like these vertical wooden drums, or they would use, you know, trash cans sometimes, you know, like those metal trash cans, anything, you know, to have like a vertical drum, and they put skin on it, and they would started bringing these out in ceremonies, and these teponazli, which are these horizontal drums here that they would play. They started bringing out the conch shell and using that. So this was like real revolutionary at that time, you know. But it kind of goes with that time, because, like I said, there was an ideological and cultural reawakening in Mexico during this time. You know, there was a lot of, you know, philosophies that was coming out, a lot of questioning of the invaders, and their implemented outlooks and things like that, their imposed outlooks. So these gentlemen at that time, like I said, they were creating major changes, and some hated them for it, and others were kind of, you know, joining the ranks. Now today, even the groups that are called themselves concheros, the ones that still dance for virgins and saints, because that genre of dance still continues, right? There are still mesas in the churches that you know, have lineages of these type of dancers. But now, guess what? You don't see them with those long nahuillas, really. You don't see them, like, you know, with collared up necklace. I mean, collars with their collar up high or long sleeves. Now they dress how Natividad Reina and the Aranda family and the Pineda family, now they're dressed more like Mexica, you know. Now, mind you, the things that they make their outfits with, like those shiny, like, you know, fake gold and shiny metallic colors, you know, that all came also from the Industrial Revolution, right? In the Industrial Revolution, all kinds of textiles came out. So people started making attire and gear, you know, regalia, as we call it, you know, to kind of look like that of the codexes, but, you know, they made it, they put that little extravagance to it. So now you see concheros, even to this day now, still, you know, dressing like how these gentlemen, what these gentlemen began. They impacted the world of danza, the world of Macehualiztli. Let's see, and then and Andres Segura, the gentleman here on the left, he established like Conchero Azteca dance groups in Texas, right? And Florencio Yesca, the gentleman on the right, he does the same in California. This happening like in the early 70s, right? These gentlemen, they're coming over the border, and they're bringing the culture and the traditions, and they're teaching like that conchero style, you know, like with the little mandolin, but it's kind of a hybrid, conchero Azteca, like conchero and Aztec, you know, again, kind of syncretized, but there is that attempt to bring back some of the ancient instruments, the pre-Hispanic instruments, right, to complement it with the European contributions of like the string instruments. So they weren't really like done with the string instruments, right? But they were like incorporating some of the pre-Hispanics, and they were done with, most of them were done with the apparel that the Europeans made them wear, and they kind of took the Azteca or the Mexica, you know, outfit, you know, or regalia, but they still had a lot of the teachings, you know, a lot of the teachings that you know, teach you to dance to like virgins and saints, and, you know, so they're doing ceremonies, but they're following the Catholic religious calendar, you know, because the Catholics have their own calendar, which is a religious calendar, right? So these gentlemen and the groups that followed them were kind of teaching that form of danza, that form of Macehualiztli. And I met Andres Segura when he was a very old man. I met him at the at the University of Nahuatl, right? The University of Nahuatl. And when I met him in his old age, he was changing. Like, he was already looking at things from the pre-Hispanic cosmovision. he wasn't talking so much about those saints and virgins anymore at that time, you know. So I was kind of happy to see that he had evolved in that way, you know, that he wasn't just all about the religion, you know, like many that remember him, they talk about that conchero tradition that he taught them, which is true. He did promote and start groups in that line, right? But he was also at the end talking a lot about, you know, Quetzalcoatl, and he was talking about Cuauhtémoc's, you know, the mandate, you know, like the words that Cuauhtémoc said, you know, when he was you know, surrendering. And he talks about, you know, coming out with our culture now. And it's a period of light. We have to like no more hiding our traditions and our culture. And, you know, so he would teach a lot about that. And for Lorenzo Yescas, as I was saying, he's credited with being one of the main persons to bring what they call Danza Ponchera, Danza Azteca to California. So these gentlemen start like bringing a lot of this cultural patrimony or heritage to the Southwest U.S., right? And but I want to say that these aren't the only two gentlemen that did that. You know, I personally know a lot of families that have brought culture from Mexico over here. You know, some of them have brought dance, some of them have brought music, some of them have brought like, you know, even mariachi traditions, right? So to think that it was only these two guys that, you know, brought danza to the Southwest and beyond, I think that's kind of an infantile viewpoint. Really, there were many persons that came and contributed, you know, to the cultural to this cultural revolution that started happening. And at this time, remember, it was like the Chicano movement was pretty strong, right, in the 60s and the 70s. So a lot of Chicanos, a lot of Mexican Americans, they were like, you know, learning their history, and they're questioning and fighting against unjust policies and governments, right? They're being revolutionary and rebels, right? So, you know, learning your pre-Hispanic heritage, you know, it just went perfectly with that, you know. So it took off like a wildfire in the Southwest, and eventually danza and the dancing and the culture started spreading throughout the U.S. And there's a genre called Mexicayo, right? So during the 60s and 70s, all the way to contemporary times, some dancers have continued the task of returning to the pre-Hispanic form of dance, music, dress, and cosmovision. This genre of danza is commonly known as Mexicayo. These Mexicayo groups, they don't dance to virgins nor saints, but instead hold ceremonies dedicated to the months or veintenas of the Mexica calendar. So this is important. So there's a genre of dancers that go under the Mexicayo, you know, genre, right? They're not the conchero with the shells. They don't do any of those string instruments. They just focus with pre-Hispanic instruments, the conch, the drums, the teponazli, the flutes, all indigenous, you know, Nahuatl songs. And this genre here, they don't dance at for virgins. They don't dance for Virgen de Guadalupe. They don't dance at Zapopan for the Virgen de Zapopan. They don't dance for any of these virgins because these groups, they feel that you know, our ancestors danced to these virgins because they were forced. You know, they were forced historically. They were forced to dance for these virgins and these saints. You know, they dressed weird before because they were forced to dress like that. They played those little string instruments because they were forced to play those instruments. So a lot of the Mexicayo groups say, hey, we don't need to, you know, continue to promote and decimate those type of teachings. We need to go back to the ancestors, the pre-Hispanic. So there's 18 months in the year in the Mexica calendar, and these Mexicayo groups, you know, they take different, they take leadership. You know, like one group might do like the winter, you know, celebration, and other Mexica groups will support them in that. Someone might do like the fall or you know, or the spring equinox, and or there's different ceremonies. There's just 18 of them, and these Mexicayo groups are working at kind of recreating these ceremonies that our ancestors did, using the Nahuatl language and honoring different parts of nature, like different natural phenomena, like the Mother Earth or the moon or the sun or the water of the earth, like Chalchihuitlicue. So all these natural concepts. So and unfortunately, I think it's unfortunate, but there's kind of a little battle sometimes, a little, you know, between the conchero groups that have the religious touch to them. They see themselves as traditional, but I like to say it's traditional, but colonial traditional, right? So these colonial traditional groups, they feel like they're higher in the hierarchy. Like, well, we come from these particular mesas from the church, and we have, the say so, and these ancient danzas, but the Mexicayo groups are saying, you know what, enough of the religious stuff, you know, everybody could believe what they want, but let's keep our ceremonies and the religion separated, you know. So it's kind of like an ongoing transformation of it. So people that are interested in danza or Macehualiztli, these are things that you got to consider. Do you want to be part of a group? For example, do you want to get into the ranks of a group that is promoting like religious beliefs, that were brought and imposed by the European invaders? Or do you want to join maybe groups that are more in line with the pre-Hispanic outlook and understanding of the cosmos and the earth? So everybody has their own choice, their own option. Maybe what works for you doesn't work for the person next to you, or vice versa. So I just wanted to bring attention to these different genres and how the function has been changing. Where originally dancing was an intricate part of society to show veneration to nature, to show veneration to the cosmos, to align our dances and our ceremonies to astronomical movements and phenomenon. That was the original sense of it. And after the Europeans came during the colonialization and sometime after, they changed it to religious function, right? So Macehualiztli had a religious function, and now many people are still promoting that religious function, except the Mexicayo groups that are aiming to kind of take it back to the original function. We want it to be part of our schools and our communities and our barrios. The Mexicayo groups want to promote our danza and our tradition and our history and our languages, but not with the European influence or with the European belief systems that were imposed. So that's pretty much I think concludes the class for and I want to thank you all for being part of this of this class, with this little workshop here, to get a better understanding of Macehualiztli and what it's went through. I don't want to say that Macehualiztli has evolved. I think it's kind of devolved because it lost its function, but I think we need to start working it back to where it was. And I applaud the concheros of the 40s that changed the attire. And I applaud the concheros of the 40s that changed the instruments back to the pre-Hispanic ones. And I call on the concheros of today to let's start bringing back the ideology and the philosophies and the languages of our ancestors, so we could continue that process of heading towards a pre-Hispanic. Ometeo Tlazokamati, thank you all for your attention.
Ometeo Tlazokamati Huitzi for that very thorough presentation on danza today, right? So before we have a little bit of time left, but before we open up, I wanted to pass it to Alma, and something that you can support us for this program. Alma?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Alma Chavez, and I am currently the intern from in my master's in social work at Season right here at the Chuchas. And I will so before we proceed to questions and comments, I'm going to be sharing a link in the chat. And it's going to be a very brief questionnaire on today's event. We ask that you answer all the questions. The questionnaire will remain anonymous, and it will help us to evaluate the program so we can better them. You will still remain in the Zoom in the session while you answer the questionnaire, and we can proceed with the comments. So I'll go ahead and set that right now.
Thank you, Alma. So we actually did have a couple of questions that actually came up during the presentation, a little bit earlier in the presentation. And the first question that we had was from Abram, which was, has there been a study of grammar of the Mayan languages that you know of?
Yeah, definitely. There have been many studies of the Mayan language. In fact, much of the Mayan language has been deciphered. We had different, like Thompson was looking at the Mayan writing like years ago, and Thompson, he thought that they had no phonetic language, you know, and Tatiana, which was one of his students, they call it breaking the Mayan code, right? She broke this code where she was able to see that the Mayans, they had actually phonemes, right? They could put sounds of words to create words, so it became a phonetic language too.
Mm.
So there's a lot of work on that. You can look up Tatiana, you know, the student of Eric Thompson, and you know, you can learn a lot about that way.
Thank you. We did have another question from Papalot. How did Two-Spirit people live in this time?
Um, Two-spirited people were seen as honorable beings as well. You know, they had an important function in society. You know, they were seen as like, for example, if it was a male that had a, you know, feminine spirit, highly developed, then they were seen as a person that was gifted with that intuition, you know, with that feminine. And I don't know if you know or if you recall, but our ancestral cosmovision, it comes from like this dual essence, right? It's not really like two actual entities, but it's this entity that has a dual nature, which is it's called Ometel, right? It has like the masculine and feminine aspect. It's like this cosmic being from where life generates, you know? So persons that were coming balanced like that, instead of seeing that they were unbalanced, they were more rounded, more balanced. They were highly valued in ancient societies. Um, but I think something I learned from one of my maestros, Arturo Mesa, he talks about that they were also allowed to like, so like if a woman felt she was more masculine in that sense, she was allowed to partake, because in those times, as we know, a lot of the work and the community you know, work that they had to do was based on genders, you know. It wasn't like a machista thing that we inherited later from the Spaniards, you know. It was like a function, like the women would transform the goods from the earth, and, you know, create delicious food and tortillas and things like that. They would care for the home. So if a male was born and felt why he identified better with that function of work, then he would. Or if there were females too, there were warrior schools for females, and it's documented in ancient codexes where they show women. You can see that in the Códice Nutal, where women are capturing men in battle, and, you know, they had their warrior shields and their arrows. So you know, they weren't strict or restricting people in that sense. They were letting people flow and identify with the gender that they wanted. But from what I understand, though, when they died, I think their funerary ceremonies, it was done according to the gender they were born under. So I think while you were alive, you can function in society in the gender that you found accordingly or that fit you best. But I think your birth and your funerary ceremonies were usually kind of gender based, you know. So that was like something that, you know, that's how I understand it, at least.
Mm.
I think we have time for about like maybe one more question. If there's anybody who would like to ask a question, please feel free to ask directly.
Well, I'm not sure so much as a question, but a comment. But I have noticed like throughout history, and not just with native people, but like let's say Sumerian people or people from the past that believe differently from Jewish people or Christians, especially Christians. Like what they would do is they would see whatever what they perceived people were worshiping as gods, and they would put their gods or onto the existing gods of the people, or the existing beings that the people were worshiping at that time. Like
Mhm.
for example, like Jupiter, like the Roman gods versus the Greek gods. They would, I think Zeus and Jupiter are the same, but then like in Christianity, they would have him be like Peter or something, like one of the disciples. And so they were trying as much as possible, I think, to, well, just shame people a lot, especially Native people, especially how you were saying, like, about them changing the way that they dressed. Because before they came along, Native people wore what they felt comfortable in, and not until this thing of guilt and shame, and that it bothers me knowing that that's what they did to control people, and to make them do what they want them to do.
Yeah.
And it's one thing if you want to share, oh, this is how what I do and things like that, but they weren't about sharing. They were about conquering and um, colonizing and things like that. And even with myself right now, I'm doing my best to decolonize even how I think about Christianity and how I think about religious thought at all, in general, because a lot of it, like one of the books that I got to read, stemmed from the beginning. It talks about how a form of Christianity was used to keep slaves subjugated and to just think about heaven later and not how their life on earth is right now. And
Mhm.
unfortunately, there are still people that are under that impression that we don't need to think about our life on earth now and just wait until we get to heaven and then everything's all good.
Exactly. So we could live miserably today. We could
Right,
take the burden and the blunt end of things, because later we'll be saved. So that's typical of invaders. They uproot people from their belief systems, from their outlooks, right, from their ideologies, and they impose.
right.
They impose things that are going to be to their benefit, typically to enslave us and have us submit to their way of life.
Hmm.
Thank you
Yeah,
for your comments.
yeah. Thank
We
you.
have, thank you. We have another question from Emmanuel.
Dude,
Hey, relatives, buenas tardes.
how's it going,
Yes.
brother?
How's it going, man? First and foremost, thank you. Thank you, everybody, Tia Chuchas, for opening up this space one more time again. My question is, will there be a second workshop on this? And a follow-up question, it would be a main one is, as a danzante, what was the main focus or responsibility of like a beginner danzante? Like as a man, like you mentioned, there was roles, assigned.
Mhm.
And then for a Calpulli, like what was the major responsibility for like as a Calpulli for the student? An example like basics to learn besides like the Nahuioli, Hekaquetzalcoatl, protocol opening and closing círculo. If you could just share a bit of that with us, I'd appreciate that.
Well, like in the beginning of the presentation, I was mentioning that it was an intricate part of our ancient society. Like it was part of our school system. Imagine how beautiful, right? Since like preschool or toddlers, we're learning danza maybe at a basic level, right? But I think ultimately our body is an instrument, through which we express those elements that give us form and life. So there are positions where we're like when we're doing certain turns, we're representing the wind, for example, or the growing of the corn that opens up like in a spiral. So I would tell like a new danzante to learn from the people around them, but keep a keen eye to the teachings that connect you more to the earth and to nature. Anything that's religious or based on faith, it's deviating you. It's deviating you from the natural function of these ancient dances, right? So, but teachings that are teaching you about nature and about earth science and astronomy, those are connecting you to who you really are. So, learning to harmonize, learning how your body moves. And I think another thing I would tell a new dancer is appreciate the duality that we have. A lot of times we're raised in a society where we have one stronger side. We're either right-handed or left-handed. And in ancient societies, these ancient dances, whatever you do to the left, you're doing it to the right. You notice that, right?
Yeah.
So we start we start developing our faculties as a human. You know, we become more keen in our observation, in our balance, and in our person. So I think it's just keep at it, hermano. Keep at it, bro, and learn from a lot of people around you. Learn from the non-examples, and learn from the examples.
Thank you. Appreciate your time, man, and looking forward to meeting you on Friday.
Amitla.
Thank you, everyone. We're gonna have Maritza be our last question.
Hi, thank you. This was the second workshop I'm able to attend, and they're just so important. I really appreciate you sharing so much wealth of information for us. My question is more related to the issue about that point of where our relatives began to embrace believing more in faith than in tangible connections with the earth and the cosmos. Like, I mean, I don't think that you know exactly why. I'm sure part of it was, you know, survival. But even today, I bring this up because we have a large group of Chicanos who are very much tied to Christianity still, even if they know the history. And I don't know, I'm just kind of curious. I wanted to hear your thoughts on that, like, because you have the concheros and then you have the meshi coyotes and that difference. Like, why would someone still embrace and believe in such violent and colonial ways of being through the religion? I don't know if I'm clear, but I'm trying.
Yeah, you are. I think it's just colonization. I mean, there's, you know, even the persons that think they're educated or they think they're informed, but they continue to believe in like invader belief systems. It's this invasion. There's something called the Stockholm syndrome, right? Where you take the beliefs of your captor, of the person that's punishing you and hurting you, and you take it as your own, and you defend it as if it's your own. And it's also a matter of like lacking dignity and principles, right? Because I commend, for example, like look at the Jewish people. The Jewish people were invaded by Hitler, right? And they see him as a criminal man, right? But you never see a Jewish trying to syncretize, like, oh, I'm gonna syncretize the Star of David with the swastika because I'm German and Jewish. You know, I was raped by Germans, but you know, they're both my culture. No one does that except us, you know? No one does it except us. We oh, I'm Christian and I'm Native, and oh, you know, we syncretize everything. I'm gonna dance Native dances, but to the Virgin. And I think it's sad. I think it shows the level and how profoundly they affected us as a society. You know, this trauma is transgenerational. You know, from the first Europeans that stepped foot and invaded and destroyed us. You know, from one generation to the other, we've inherited this lack of self-esteem, this lack of self-respect, lack of scientific thinking. You know, and you know, we use their frame, their model of understanding the world. You know, this religious Judeo-Christian model to express our spirituality, for example. So I think it's not that the persons are villains or anything, but I think it's one of those side effects, you know, of this historical trauma that we lived through.
Thank you. That was really important. Yeah, it is a historical trauma. And with that, I just want to end with, you know, we all have genetic memory, right? And when you were going over the science, art, and of the ancestors expressed through the astronomical alignments, for example, the pyramid images that you have with the summer solstice, equinox, and winter solstice, at that moment, when you were sharing how they built the churches on top of the pyramids, my body just felt like this deep sadness, and I was crying.
Yeah, it hurts. Yeah.
I was crying through that because it took me back, I'm sure, you know. So anyhow, I just want to thank you and Tia Chuchas for the great work that you're all doing. Thank you.
Appreciate it, sister.
Ometel, Cozkacuauhtli Huitzilzenteotl, for sharing your sabiduría and knowledge with us today and wisdom. I want to thank you everybody for joining us today. We are going to be, this is our last workshop with Calpulli Tloqueh Nahuaqueh, but we will be having some upcoming workshops in November. So if you follow Tia Chucha's, you can check our website and we'll be posting the links to those events soon. So again, Tlazokamati, thank you so much. And if you haven't had a chance to fill out that survey, please do. It all helps to just, remind, those that, that this is important information and that we want to continue sharing with the community, as this program is also actually supported by the California Humanities. So again, Tlazokamati and hasta luego. Thank you for joining us.
Cozkacuauhtli. Good evening, Kwaliowali.